Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of The Chocolate Life Live. My name is Clay Gordon. I'm your host today, and I'm also the creator and the moderator of TheChocolateLife.com. Today, the topic is going to be what I think is an interesting one, and I hope you will too. It's about influences and orthodoxy. And I'm going to get into what I mean by influences and orthodoxy in just a second. But what I'd like to do is remind everybody that please go into the comments, whether you're watching on YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook, and let me know where in the world you are connecting from. I'd like to know just where the scope of the audience is today, whether you're coming from the United States or you're coming from Europe or you're coming from someone else. Just put it in the comments and let me know. I'd really appreciate that. And of course, if you have a question or a comment about today's topic, you can also throw that into the comments and I will get it up on the screen and get the question asked and attempt to answer it during the course of the hour. Before I begin, as I often do, what I'd like to also do is point you to the fact that this is the homepage of The Chocolate Life right now. For every single one of these live streams, I do create a post which talks about what the overview for the episode is going to be. So here is the post for today. There is, as I say, you scroll down, there are the links. You're watching on YouTube after the fact. On LinkedIn or Facebook, you can find it there. There's always an episode overview, and then we can also get some resource links. I put some resource links in. So today, I didn't want to influences anybody's comments, what they might think were influences. And so I will put the resource links in after today's live stream is over. And we'll talk about that. But it's important for me that I get this done every week so that you, the viewer, know what it is that I'm attempting to do, why it is that I'm attempting to do it. And you can go to these pages on the Chocolate Life. Now, there is also, if you click on this link at the top, which says The Chocolate Life Live, there's an archive of every single one of the Chocolate Life Live episodes. And I've started doing some generated summaries and putting them in there as well when it makes sense to go into that. So I just want to give everybody a quick heads up on what it is that we're going and what it is that the Chocolate Life is about, and where to go find some resources about each one of the episodes that we're going through. So today's topic is about influences and orthodoxy. And what I wanted to do with this picture, and I think I'm going to start talking about what my inspirations were in these pictures, is that the question is, many people just wander through their day and they don't pay attention to what it is that's going on. And I have said often in the past that language is important. The words we choose inform our beliefs, and our beliefs inform our actions, and our actions have consequences. And that's what influences are all about. It's, is the unexamined chocolate life worth living, to paraphrase. And so if we're just wandering through, if we're not paying attention, if we're not examining our environment, we're not asking questions, what is it that we're missing? And that's what it is that I want to talk about today, the influences that of the modern craft chocolate movement. And so with that, I think I want to start with a little bit of a history lesson. And I think that what's going to happen with that history lesson is I want to go and talk about a company that I think is critical to the modern craft chocolate movement. And this is Maison Bonat in Rowntree, France. So coincidentally, it turns out that this is the company that influenced my decision to get into the chocolate business in 1994. But the company has been making chocolate since 1884. Right. And it was in 1984 that they introduced, in modern times, the first single origin chocolates that were marketed as single origin chocolates. And so it's hard to disentangle the idea of single origin from the modern craft movement. One can argue whether or not Bonat is a craft chocolate maker. It depends on your definition. I would definitely consider them to be a craft chocolate maker. But here we find, I think, one of the first entry points into what I think of is the modern craft chocolate movement. And this is the deliberate creation, the reintroduction for the 100th anniversary of the company's decision to make chocolate, of the introduction of single origin chocolate bars. Now, that's 1984. And it is in 1994 that I was introduced to single origin chocolate, and I made my decision to get into the chocolate business. So this is my connection. I think, for me, it's a very personal connection, but I think there's also a really, really good reason for thinking modern single origin chocolate. Many people think it's Valrhona with Mangiare, which is their Madagascar chocolate, but that didn't happen until 2 years or so after the introduction in 1984 of Bonnat's single origin chocolate. It's easy to be able to say that the modern craft chocolate movement was kicked off by this company. And I went to the Wayback Machine and I went to look for companies' websites as a part of doing this. This is definitely an old website. The capture here is the 5th of December, 1998. It's one of the first times that the Wayback Machine went and captured the Scharfenberger website. But Scharfenberger Chocolate Maker, co-founded by John Scharfenberger and Robert Steinberg, was the first new chocolate factory in the United States for more than 50 years. And their goal was to create in the United States a chocolate of a quality that would compare with what Valrhona was doing in France. And that's, John started off, he was a champagne blender for Clicquot. He had Scharfenberger wine cellars in California. He sold Scharfenberger and the wine cellars and started Scharfenberger Chocolate Maker. One of the reasons why Scharfenberger is 2 words is because he sold the rights to his name, Scharfenberger with the wine cellars. And so we needed to separate the 2 words. You need to create 2 words out of it. But the goal here was in 1997, 1998 to create an American version of Valrhona. And interestingly enough, their first offerings did not include a single origin chocolate. Everything that they introduced at the very beginning was a blend. And that's very, very much in line with Scharfenberger's training as a champagne blender and in the sparkling wine industry, where there are not a whole lot of vintaged champagnes. Right. So what's really important here to know, in addition to their being the first of the modern generation of new chocolate makers, is that Scharfenberger Chocolate Maker is given credit for coining the phrase bean to bar. Right? And the idea being that they would use this phrase bean to bar to be able to differentiate themselves from what it was that industrial chocolate makers were doing. And when in fact, there's no difference, right? So if I look at a big industrial chocolate maker like Barry Callebaut or Agostoni or Ecam owns Agostoni brand, or even Domori, they bring beans into their factory and they create chocolate, often in bar form. And so big industrial chocolate makers are bean to bar chocolate makers, sort of by definition. But John was able to promote bean to bar chocolate as somehow sort of synonymous with artisan chocolate, and I don't know that the word craft chocolate was even in use or in play at that time in 1997, 1998. But we see this is the first craft chocolate maker in the modern craft chocolate movement. And so we have an enormous debt of gratitude that needs to be paid to John and Robert. And then we also have to thank them, right, for the coining of the term bean to bar. Right, really, really important. I did another screen grab. This is from 1998, a little later in the year. And what we'll do is these are very, very much remnants of the period of time that they were put together. So this is 1998. This is earlier in the year in 1998. Very, very much reminiscent of the state of website design at the time, as captured by the Wayback Machine and its limitations. Right? So I wanted to go from Scharfenberger. So this is 1998, and we now have a number of years right? So from 1998 into the early 2000s, so into 2003, 2004, there is this growing American craft chocolate movement. And it includes Amano, Patrick, Stephen DeVries would have been in that movement, a number of influential players. I mean, um, Alan McClure at Patrick Chocolate is no longer full-time involved in making chocolate. He's still involved in the industry. Steve DeVries is obviously still involved in the industry, and Art Pollard and Amano Chocolate are all still evolved. Their roles have evolved. They're doing slightly different things, but they are still here. And interestingly enough, they tried in sort of the 2006, 2007 timeframe, along with Sean Askinosie at Askinosie Chocolate, to form something that they wanted to call the American Craft Chocolate Association. And in the end, they couldn't do it because they didn't do it because they couldn't come up with an agreed upon definition of what bean to bar meant. So it's still a real problem today, so many, many years later, that there's no commonly accepted definition for what bean to bar actually means. I am for a more open, inclusive use of the phrase bean to bar, less exclusive. I believe it's no longer meaningful as a differentiator between small chocolate makers and big industrial chocolate makers. So relying on it as a means to differentiate is a real problem, in my opinion. But we go from that period of time, right, into the early 2000s. And what I want to do is I want to point out a couple of websites that are also really, really important in the early 2000s. The first one of those is 70%.com. Martin Christie, 70%.com. This was one of the first online communities where people could get together and post their opinions about chocolate bars. It was a step up from what had been done in the Usenet, so alt.rec.chocolate, for example, which is where I met, among other people, Alex Rast, who's involved with Martin and the other founders of the International Institute of Cocoa and Chocolate Tasting, as well as the International Chocolate Awards. But this is one of the first, way back, scrapes of 70%.com. So we find a lot of missing assets. And I don't know that if we actually click on any of the links, that what we'll do is we'll actually get anything that is really useful. No. All right. So there wasn't a whole lot there. Another website that went up within a month or so, it's hard to know exactly. I mean, my memory is that Chocophile.com originally went up in May of 2001. The first crawl of Chocophile.com, which we can find in the Wayback Machine, is in early June, whereas the first crawl of 70%.com is in early May. So Martin and I were in this around the same time. And what we have is, in this burgeoning small new chocolate maker community, there is an interest in people sharing their thoughts about the chocolate. And this is what 70%.com was doing and what I was trying to do at Chocophile.com. Chocophile.com was more a blog. This was mostly about what I thought about things, news and reviews and things like that. And what Martin was doing back in 2001 was a little bit more about generating community. There was a lot more community input in terms of what goes on. So this is what's happening in the early 2000s. We're going from one chocolate maker, in Scharfenberger in 1997. And then we've got Martin and me in early 2001, first half of 2001. But I'm going to argue that the single greatest influence in the craft chocolate world is this website right here and this man right here. So this is John Nancy and Chocolate Alchemy. If I had to pick a single person and a single website who has had more influence over the shape of the modern craft chocolate movement than anyone, it is going to be John Nancy. what John started doing I think this went live in early 2004, maybe late 2003, sometime in there, is that he found a way to use relatively inexpensive household appliances, much of it from an Indian kitchen perspective. So small melangers from companies like Spectra Plaza Santa, and Cocoa Town. So these were devices that were originally used to refine um, not idli batter. So they would take a soaked grain like lentils and refine it into a batter. And you find them in home kitchens and restaurant kitchens throughout India. And there was a thriving business about importing these machines into the United States for home kitchens here from expat people who had emigrated to the United States or were living in the United States who had come from India. And what John pioneered, right, was an inexpensive production pathway. So if we look at what Scharfenberger invested in their first factory, it was multiple millions of dollars. If we look at what Art Pollard and people invested in their factories, it was a lot of money. I have a rough idea. I don't know if Sean wants to share it. Well, Sean wants to share it, but I have a rough idea of what Sean Eskinosi invested in his first factory. All right, and I know that Sean started off using this production pathway. Right. What he didn't have at the time was the ability to scale up to the level of production that he wanted to get to using this production pathway. And so he went and bought much, much larger equipment, which made an enormous amount of sense for what it is that he's trying to do. But virtually everyone, right, who has gotten involved in craft chocolate since 2003, 2004, has at one time or another visited this website, used it and the bulletin board system, the forums, right, as a reference for number one, the equipment, the production pathway, as a place to get answers to questions, right? And what's really exciting about this for me is that there were three of these online communities. There was chocolatefile.com, 70%.com, and Chocolate Alchemy. Each of us was approaching a different audience for a different reason. And so even though we were all trying to serve the same larger market in terms of craft chocolate, what we were doing is we were thinking about different aspects of the community and how to go about support them. And I'm still here with the Chocolate Life after all this time. Martin is gone on to co-found the International Chocolate Awards, and also to be a co-founder of the International Institute for Cocoa and Chocolate Tasting. And John is still working on Chocolate Alchemy, right? But of the three of us, I am happy to point out that John is the single most important influence, in the sense that there are probably 4,000 or 5,000 small chocolate makers around the world, all of whom have started off using this as a reference. And people will go here before they go on to the r/chocolate subreddit. People will go here before they go onto any one of dozens of Facebook groups or any one of different groups in LinkedIn or all these other places. They're going here first. And this is where we have I'm going to stop and talk about influences for just a second and start thinking about orthodoxy, right? And one of the challenges that I have around the phrase bean to bar, and I've mentioned this before, is that if you self-identify as a bean to bar chocolate maker, chances are all you make is bars. Now, this has become less so over the course of the last 5 years or so. But if somebody 10 years ago said that they were bean to bar chocolate maker, chances are all they made was bars. We're going to get to another bit of influence, important, which dovetails there, which I think is really important, right? But what we do is we have an orthodoxy around bean to bar. People are self-identifying as a bean to bar chocolate maker. What does it mean to be a bean to bar chocolate maker? It means that all of the processes used to make the chocolate are performed by me or by my employees. So I import the beans, I bring them into my factory, I'm going to clean them, I'm going to roast them, I'm going to crack and winnow them, I'm going to refine them. I might conch them in a melanger, and then I'm going to temper and mold and wrap into bars. That's what it meant to be a bean to bar chocolate maker. And there are a couple of challenges with that for me. Number one is this notion of ownership as opposed to supervision. So if I personally oversaw everything, lots of chocolate makers have employees. If I personally oversee everything, do all of the people who do the work for me have to be in a place that I own? Do I or the bank need to own all the equipment? Right? So what happened is that people who identified themselves as bean to bar chocolate makers, chances are all they made was bars. And so what they'd done is they'd put a set of blinders around their thinking. They built a box around their thinking that said a bean to bar chocolate maker makes bars, right? Rather than saying, I'm a chocolate maker, what can I make with the chocolate that I make? Because there are lots of things that can be made using chocolate. And so what I want to do is I want to get people to question if they self-identify as a bean to bar chocolate maker. So this is a concept that was introduced, it was a phrase that was introduced by John Scharfenberger and Bob Steinberg back in 1997, 1998 to describe what it is that they were doing. What does that mean for you, right? Does bean to bar mean that all I am making is chocolate bars? I would say that if we have thousands of small chocolate makers and all they're making is bars, or mostly what they're making is bars, then we have a lot of people jumping into a very, very crowded marketplace. And so I asked the question, right? If you're a bean to bar chocolate maker and all you're making is bars, and you're buying beans from the same sources, whether it's from Berthiel-Atkinson or whether it's Uncommon or whether it's Meridian or wherever you're buying the cocoa, how do you differentiate your product? So how is the actual product, not the packaging, that you're making different from everyone else who's buying their beans from exactly the same place using exactly the same production pathway that you're using? How do you differentiate what you're doing? And how do you make that differentiation visible to a consumer, right? Which is really, really hard, right? From the chocolate alchemy perspective, what I've learned is that people go, oh, and this ties back into what I think are some of the ethics, if we want to say, of the bean to bar and craft chocolate movement. There's a sort of fetishization of labor, right? The more labor you put into a product, the better the product is. Somehow labor is concomitant with quality, and the only direct correlation between labor and the quality of your product is the cost, finished cost. So if I'm a small chocolate maker, labor is the single biggest component of your price structure. And if you're putting more labor into the product than you need to, then all you're doing is raising the price. Now, some people will say, listen, I individually hand shell raw beans. And this is a company, I know of at least one company that does that. That's just an insane amount of work. Does it reduce the possibility for lead contamination in your chocolate? Yes, it does, right? Is it sustainable as a business in the long term? Man, it makes things very, very expensive in ways that they don't need to be. And so people who were here last week when I was doing my AMA might remember I had a conversation with Kjell Fjorden I think he's in Sweden, about cleaning beans and what can you do to reduce the cost of cleaning beans. The orthodoxy of what it is that John has put together here at Chocolate Alchemy is that there is a right way to do this, right? And the preferred production pathway is the John Nancy way. So people will go to him and get advice about roasting. And if you talk to people who are roasting cocoa beans, what they'll do is, many people will say, not all of them, but many people will say, I learned how to roast from John Nancy, right? And I learned, the process of making chocolate from point A to point Z from John Nancy at Chocolate Alchemy. Not bad, right? But it's not bad. I mean, I have an enormous amount of respect for the work that John has done to kickstart this industry. Right. I will say, however, that I think there is a downside to this, which is there's not a whole lot of experimentation, which is being done on other ways to produce chocolate at a small scale. because there's just this way to do it. So number one is the right way to make chocolate is stone on stone grinding, right? And I think a lot of that is from the community that has learned how to make chocolate from John. That what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to do metal and metals, because somehow using a universal or using a ball mill or using 3-roll mills is somehow less authentic, right? And one of the challenges that everyone faces is how do we go from making a small amount of chocolate to making a large amount of chocolate, right? Is you end up, you know, perhaps investing in equipment choices which are incredibly inefficient, right? In terms of how we go about thinking about how we want to scale up production. Now, again, what I want to emphasize here is that I think this person here is the single most influential person in the craft chocolate movement in history, right? And all that it is that he has done for people around the world who are getting into making chocolate. What I want to suggest, however, is that how do we think beyond what it is that John is doing? I mean, there's still an enormous amount of value in what it is that he's doing. He's working with a particular group of people. And one of the bits of orthodoxy that I find to be challenging are related to each other. Number one is that there's an inexpensive DIY solution to everything, right? So rather than actually investing in a piece of equipment that was designed and built for purpose, what I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out a way to perform that same action by going to the hardware store and doing something on my own. Often it's less efficient. Yes, it might have a lower cost up front, right? But in the long run, if it's less efficient and you're not actually including the cost of labor and everything that you're doing, it could end up being much more expensive. So there is a DIY component here, right? That I think we need to be, as part of the orthodoxy, that I think it's a negative aspect of this influence. And the other one is that you can find all the answers to all your problems for free just by going to Facebook and going into a group and asking a question, right? And that's not always the case. Now people may say, hey, Clay, isn't that a little bit of self-serving because you're a consultant? The answer is yes. And I get frustrated when people would say, well, Clay, I really don't want to engage your services, even though I know in the long run it will be helpful to have a sounding board, right, with the kind of experience that you have. I mean, one of the challenges of going into a group on Facebook or someplace else is you might get 3 or 4 pieces of advice which are diametrically opposed to each other. And the challenge that you have is then figuring out which one of them, right, is the bit of advice that you're going to follow, right? So, hats off, kudos, everything that's going on that John has done. But I think that there needs to be, number one, no more exploration for alternatives at small scale production. How do we go about doing things? There are other ways to do this, especially when it comes to conching, because melangers are very, very inefficient as devices for conching. Then this notion of I can DIY anything, right? And then this notion of everything in the way of advice should be for free, right? And examining that interplay, I think is where what I wanted is to do today. I mean, do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Do you think that, nah, it's like, this is the way to do it? The John Nancy way is the way to do it? Do you think that, no, all this advice should be free? I should be able to go and get free advice at every level, right? Throw it in the comments. Let me know whether you're watching live or afterwards. I'm really, really interested in knowing what you think. Right. So the next, I think, really, really important influence, right, in the world of chocolate is these guys here, the Mast Brothers. This is the website in 2001. I actually have correspondence with Rick Mast going back to May of 2009 when I visited them in the shop in Williamsburg. This is probably the first time, so we're looking at 2009. We're looking at the first time that someone I'm sorry, 1919. So this is the website in 2001. Um, is that true? No, this is the website in 2012. Um, so the Mass Brothers, I think, are the first chocolate makers, right, to popularize the notion of single origin, two ingredient chocolate. And they did it in that period of time when they went from the original factory on North 3rd Street and expanded into the larger factory just down the street. Now, those people who were familiar with the controversy, which erupted in 2015 over the origin story, were the Mass Brothers at some point buying chocolate in and melting it, and then passing it off as their own chocolate that they made from beans in their factory. Not going to opine either way on that today, but that was the controversy. Right. What we do find is that by the time they moved from one location to the other location on North 3rd Street, they had gone into single origin, two ingredient chocolate, so just cocoa beans and sugar. Right. And what that did was it set up a set of expectations about what craft chocolate was supposed to be like. That there was a pure way to do it, a better way to do it. And the Mass Brothers were great at marketing around this whole idea. The next company to come into this, again, it's in early 2011 or thereabouts, is Dandelion. And I think that by the time Dandelion chocolate came in here, and they also were making only two ingredient, single origin chocolates at the very beginning, that what this was doing is it was sort of cementing into the psyche of the craft chocolate movement and the American public interested in craft chocolate that single origin, two ingredient chocolate was pure, made in Melanger, right? Was what bean to bar chocolate was, what craft chocolate was. Right? And the challenge with all of that is that, number one, right, that's not what the average customer thinks that chocolate is, or thinks that good chocolate is. I mean, there's a reason why, right, craft chocolate has not been able to grow out of the like 0.5% to no more than 1% of the world chocolate market. And that's because they're making chocolate which appeals to only a very small segment of the marketplace, right? Not everybody wants single origin, two ingredient chocolate, right? Most people want chocolate that has got added cocoa butter, right? Just by, just look at consumption patterns. Most people want chocolate that's added cocoa butter. A lot of people like chocolate with vanilla in it and other flavorings. And so I think that for many, many years, the Orthodoxy set up by the Mass Brothers and Dandelion, fabulous marketers, really, really good at communicating around their messaging, right? That they're an important influence, the Mass Brothers, both positively and negatively, and Dandelion Chocolate positively as an influence, right? However, we need to go take a look at how that influence may or may not, right, have been adopted more broadly, and it became the orthodox way of thinking. High cocoa content, two ingredient, no blending of any kind, right? So we're not gonna bring the 20 bags of beans that we got in. We're not going to blend the bags of beans. We're not going to do any roast blending after we've cracked and winnowed. We're not going to do any blending coming out of the melangers. So every batch, right, is its own opportunity, right? And I think that a lot of people bought into that notion. A lot of craft chocolate makers bought into that notion. So if I make chocolate like the Mass Brothers, right, and I put it in these beautiful, right, wrappers, which look like wallpaper, right, like the Mass Brothers, or if I make chocolate like Dandelion makes it, and I can put it into wrappers that looks like Dandelion, is if I can make product that looks like theirs and tastes like theirs, I'm going to be successful, right? And one of the challenges that you need to be aware of, we need to be aware of when we're making our decisions about who our mentors are going to be, who we're looking up to, right, is we need to understand to what extent are there circumstances which I'm not going to be able to replicate. So, when the Mass Brothers went from the first location on North 3rd Street to the second location on North 3rd Street, they had a multi-million-dollar investment in the company. This was not something that they bootstrapped out of revenue, right? Um, and the founders of Dandelion had sold a dot-com company to a big communications company and walked away with a lot of money. And they had the resources to be unprofitable for a very, very long period of time. And so it's also really, it's also really important is that I did a Discover Chocolate tour of Paris around the Salon de Chocolat in November of 2010. And Todd Mazonis and his wife Elaine, I want to say Wary, I hope I get that right, were on that trip with me. And this was before they launched the company. And so I had a chance at that point to talk about what it is that they were doing. And, Todd was really, really focused on this really, really sort of pure notion of what it is that they were going to do. And so we have here really, really important influences, the Mass Brothers and Dandelion Chocolate. But what we did is we also sort of reinforced what it meant to be a bean to bar chocolate maker, this notion of everything is under one roof, and I am going to I'm going to supervise everything myself, right? That's what it meant to be bean to bar. And that there was going to be a specific type of equipment that we were going to use. So when the Mass Brothers wanted to scale up from 2 or 3 Cocoa Town ECGC 65s, roughly 35 kilo batch capacity, what they did is they bought 20 of them. And 20 of them probably would have cost, over $100,000, over $200,000, $10,000 a piece, over $200,000. Probably one of the least environmentally responsible ways to scale up production to do what it is we're doing, because every grinder was dedicated to a particular origin or a particular product, and it was a great part of their marketing. And you could go into the store and you could watch a lot of these things turning, so it was nice theater and good that way. But people thought, that's how you do it. I mean, if I can be like the Mass Brothers in the way I scale production, this is what it is that I can do. And to some extent, Dandelion bought into this as well. They had their space in the Mission District, and there were a bunch of Cocoa Towns in that machine. There was a small roaster, a bunch of Cocoa Towns. They had a vertical cutter mixer, which was doing the pre-refining before they put things into the Cocoa Towns. But you could walk in, and there was a theater, and you could see these machines running. And those two businesses defined, right, for the early part of the 2000s and into the early 2010s, what it meant to be a bean to bar and craft chocolate maker. Right? Yes, it is the least expensive way to start a business. Right? Prior to John Nancy and Chocolate Alchemy, if you wanted to get into making chocolate, you had to spend hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, right, in order to get set up. John Nancy said, no, you only need, right, you can use your oven, right, as a roaster, your home oven, or a little tiny coffee roaster like a Beemore. You can crack and winnow with a hair dryer, or we have this small DIY crack winnower you can purchase, or then we're going to get a champion juicer involved to do the cracker and then the winnower, and then we can use. It was, how do we go about getting something that will work for the lowest cost possible? And so if I bought a little ChocoVision Rev 2, I mean, for $1,100 or $1,200 or so, I had all the equipment that I needed in order to make chocolate. And I can tell you that it's real easy to make chocolate. It's very easy to make chocolate. What's hard is making good chocolate consistently. And there's a lot of stuff that goes into moving from fresh chocolate. Oh, I've made chocolate from cocoa beans the first time. This is the best thing ever because it's fresh and you've just made it. to, okay, how do I do this over and over again and make it work, right? But there's this orthodoxy that came in. If I can do it like the Dandelion, if I can do it like the Mass Brothers, this is the way to go about do it. They've been successful. They figured it out, and that's what I want to. That's what I want to be. And if the challenge again to each one of you who's watching this is to understand um, how my business and my circumstances, how they might be different from these mentors, these companies that I put up as exemplars. These are the people I want to be like. I mean, do they have advantages that you don't have? I mean, the market in 2023 is very different from the market in 2013, is very different from the market in 2003. And so have things change? If you're making these assumptions, right, what does that mean for you, right? And you can make whatever decision you want. It's not for me to pass judgment on you, and I don't want to be condescending, right? I just think you want to be aware of what it is you're doing, why it is you're doing, making the decisions that you're making. All right. So having said all that, I want to jump to LinkedIn because as I have been doing for the last couple of weeks, what I've been doing is I've been posting in advance of the live stream about what it is that I'm planning to do, the topic, and asking for input. And so I asked the question, what do you think is or are the most important influences on the modern craft chocolate movement and why? Right? I also I should have started off this, gave a definition for orthodox using, or not, the etymology of orthodox from the late Latin orthodoxus, from the Greek orthodoxos, having the right opinion, from orthos, right and true, and doxa, opinion. So essentially, orthodox means right thinking, right? And orthodoxy in chocolate is that there has, in my opinion, orthodoxy in craft chocolate is there has been developed over time, not on purpose, but sort of through gradual consent by the community, that there is a right way to make craft chocolate, and the right way includes stone on stone. The right way is single origin, no blending whatsoever, right? The only blending you might do is if you're adding cocoa butter, the cocoa butter might come from a different origin, right? We can argue about whether that means it's not single origin anymore, right? But there are lots of arguments on that topic, but there has formed this orthodox opinion. This is the right way to do it, and if you're not doing it this way, right, you're not a bean to bar chocolate maker, right? Or you're not a craft chocolate maker. And I think the best example of that, coming back from 2007, 2008, is Cho. One of the things that they did, I mean, number one, just like Jane Metcalf and Louis Rossetto, co-founders of Wired Magazine, were the first money into the business, and they used their understanding of social media at the time and just blew it up. I mean, they were just brilliant early on. This is late 2007, early 2008. Then they went radio silent for 6 months or longer before they went from their beta tests into production. And so they lost credibility in that respect. But one of the things that they did, which I think is really, really interesting, is they sent their chocolate maker to origin, to a producing country, where the chocolate maker oversaw the roast of the beans and grinding into liquor. And then they brought the liquor back to San Francisco. And that's where they finished the chocolate. And the question became, right, and still is for many people, are you truly a bean to bar chocolate maker, right, if you do that, right? And it depends upon, I suppose, this notion of ownership and supervision. As long as the chocolate maker is going to the country where the beans come from, right, as long as they're overseeing what's going on, then every single time, every single run, the chocolate maker goes to origin, oversees the roast, oversees the grinding, right? Then I don't have a problem calling that company bean to bar, right? I just don't have a problem thinking about it as bean to bar. But I am in the minority when it comes to that. As I said, I want to be more inclusive than exclusive. And this is one of the places where orthodoxy, I believe, has gotten in the way of the growth of the industry, where we're fighting about things. The community has internal disagreements about basic definitions, and we're at disagreement or we're confused about what's going on. Then no wonder that the average consumer is confused. This is not the place where we want to be having these kinds of arguments. right? But what's going on here, which I think is really interesting, and one of the reasons why I love asking the question on LinkedIn, is this comment, which I really hadn't thought. I want to thank Olga Alves for mentioning this. Is one of the most important influences on the modern craft chocolate movement is that customers are always looking for new experiences, right? And it's not an answer to this question that I had ever come up with myself. It's not something that I really thought about. So I had built a box around my thinking about what influences meant and what orthodoxy meant, right? And I hadn't really considered what it might mean, what the kind of influences that the average consumer might have on this. So one of the biggest influences is that customers are always looking for new experiences. And I think that's absolutely right. If you are only making the same thing, three things over and over again, you're only going to appeal to a relatively small group of people, right? And that what you need to do is you need to make it fresh and interesting for yourself, and you need to make it fresh and interesting for your customers. And so thinking about new experiences, what do new experiences mean? So I am really, really happy that, Olga made this suggestion, because I think it's absolutely brilliant. Nothing that I would have put together, nothing that I would have thought of for myself. And that's one of the reasons why I do these things, do these Chocolate Life Lives, is that it's an opportunity for me to research. It's an opportunity for me to learn. It grows my understanding, and I'm able to talk about things in a more nuanced way. And so when somebody comes to me out of right field, and it's like, oh, wow. I mean, this is something that I really hadn't thought of in this context, and I need to incorporate it into my thinking. This is brilliant for me. So thank you, Olga, because it surprised me, and I think that's really, really, really good. I want to jump in and say hello to Thomas Forbes, who's in New Jersey, as I recall. He's got a couple of comments. The first one of which is that Taza probably deserves a mention. And Thomas, I would like to know exactly why you think, what it is about Taza that deserves a mention. Now, one of the things that I could say is that what they did is they pioneered a style of chocolate making that wasn't European. So it wasn't this creamy European style of chocolate making, and it wasn't traditional Oaxacan Mexican chocolate making. So the chocolate from Modica, it wasn't as coarse as we might get from Abuelito or one of these other chocolates, which are made for turning into drinking chocolate as opposed to eating. I've long thought about what Taza was doing as something that I think of as a pan-American. So it combines some aspects of European style chocolate making, right, with some aspects of traditional Mexican style chocolate making. And they did it in a very, very different way. So maybe they started off in Melangers. I don't know the answer to that question, but when I visited the factory in Somerville, that what I noticed is that they had brought molinos from Oaxaca, and Alex Whitmore learned how to do the traditional dressing so he could make sure that the faces were parallel when they wore down and that they had the right grooves in them. And they were using the molinos to do the first refinement of the beans into liquor. And then they ran things through 3-roll mills. And the 3-roll mills were set in such, I believe it was a 3-roll, not a 5-roll, set to such a way that they weren't getting it to this super smooth consistency, that there was a slightly granular texture to what was going on. And I think that, people, they put it in a disc form, so it looked like that traditional Mexican hot chocolate thing, but it was edible. I mean, it broke all of the rules of craft chocolate at the time, or most of the rules of craft chocolate at the time. And I think that novelty was one of the things that people responded to, and the fact that people we're obviously responding to the flavors and flavor combinations, but there was something about the texture that people really, really responded to, which I think is why. Have they been influential? No. right? When this is where I'm going to push back, Thomas, you're saying exactly, right? If when we talk about this style of chocolate making, have they been influential? No, because nobody else is doing it, right? So in what respect do you think they're influential, right? If there aren't other companies who are following what it is that they're doing. So follow-up question for you, Thomas, on that. I mean, I have, again, utmost respect for Alex. Now, Whitmore and what it is that they're doing. They've also been an advocate of fairly trading beans, of openness in reporting. That's always been an aspect of the business. So in that respect, maybe they've been influential. Okay, this is interesting. They're influential because they are for sale in many places. So, okay, I mean, I think that's really, really interesting that they're for sale in many, many places. So, they are probably, so from what it is that I know from speaking to importers in Europe, they are probably one of the most successful American brands that are sold in Europe, right? That they sold, 5, 10x over other American brands. And this is for speaking with Dennis Van Essen at High Five. It's like just like incredibly popular there. And so many people point to the Mass Brothers as being the company that introduced many, many people to craft chocolate for the first time, right? And so has Taza stepped into place? Are they an introduction to craft chocolate? Because it could be true. But again, one of the challenges I would make is that distribution is one of the biggest challenges. If I'm a craft chocolate maker and what I want to do is I want to sell chocolate outside my local area or other than what I can reach online and ship to, if I want to do it, or if I want to sell it into, big wholesale accounts, how do I get into that distribution? If I want to sell it internationally, how do I get into that distribution? So I think that what Taza represents is how have they been successful in doing these things? So if I wanted to say, yes, I would like to be like Taza, right? You would go through and say, what is it about Taza, right? What have they done that nobody else has done that have enabled them to do these things, right? And I think a challenge would be, how would I go about doing it today, right? So in 2023, as opposed to 15 years ago or more, which is when Taza started what it is that they were doing. So market dynamics have changed a bit. Thomas, it's a great idea, and I think it's a fabulous a fabulous notion to think about that. And I think maybe that's another thing, another topic for a future Chocolate Life Live. Let me know about it. Is let's get a bunch of companies and let's go. Okay, let's deconstruct them and say, okay, what made them special? Why are these people successful? Could be a really, really interesting thing, and it could be value. If you're interested, let me know in the comments. I would be happy to go and schedule something like that going forward. You've also said you're a big fan of Spangvola and Fortunato. Oh, Spangvola is Eric Reed. He's located in the DC area, but he's got a farm in the Dominican Republic. People who were on my Clubhouse a couple of years ago will know that Eric was a regular contributor to Clubhouse, specifically talking about his experiences in fermentation experiments in the Dominican Republic. I haven't followed up with him on that. I do need to. I want to get him back on here and talk about what it is that he's doing and talk about cocoa in the Dominican Republic. So I'll reach out to Eric again. Fortunato, have they been influential? Interesting question. So Fortunato is, for those people who don't know, it's the name of a farmer in the Marañón River Valley region. There were a bunch of Americans who were working down there, and they ran across this cocoa in this valley, and they did some genetic testing on it and found that it was a unique genetic variety. And because it was a unique genetic variety and because there wasn't much of it, their marketing was calling it the rarest cocoa in the world, right? And somehow rarest cocoa in the world became conflated with the best cocoa in the world. And is it the rarest cocoa in the world? Probably not. Is it the best cocoa in the world? Probably not. Really, really good marketing. And so they've been influential in terms of their marketing. Who's learned from that? Maybe the people at TOAC have learned from the marketing of Fortunato. I don't know exactly which comes first, which comes afterwards. But there's some interesting stuff to examine there. Why was Fortunato so successful at what it is they did, and how influential have they been? Have they been influential in the sense that now people are marketing cocoa in a very, very different way? It's a really, really interesting question, and I don't have answers at the moment. But I think they're really, really great questions, Thomas, and thank you very, very much for for um, um, for sharing those with me today. I also want to go back and say, man, International Chocolate Awards is influential, right? Um, I think that influential in terms of the chocolate industry, right? I think that there are many people who go and they look at the International Chocolate Awards and the ability to put that awards on their bars as a badge of honor, which it definitely is, right? The notion, however, is that where is it influential? If you want to get your chocolate bars into a distributor, then having awards is really, really important, because the distributor is going to say, I have 5 different bars from the same origin, from different makers. What's going to be easiest for me to sell? And the one that has the most awards on it is going to be easiest for me to sell. So influential, but there's an orthodoxy there. Can we take a look, historically examining the kinds of bars that win, and say, yes, there is a style of chocolate making that is more highly awarded by the judges over time? So this is sort of the Robert Parker effect. Has there been an influence? Has the industry been guided in a particular direction by the tastes of the grand jury? Maybe. It's hard to tell, because the data we would want in order to be able to answer those questions is not widely made available for one reason or another. But that's a really, really interesting question to do. In terms of the 99.5% of the customers in the world who are not purchasing craft chocolate, I don't know how influential they are. And I don't know how influential they have been in terms of growing the share of the market, right, that is not currently already bought into the notion of craft chocolate and artisan chocolate, or handcrafted chocolate, whatever, however it is that you want to describe this thing. And so, again, I think there are good reasons, there are good things that the International Chocolate Awards has done. I think that there is an orthodoxy of thinking which has come about as a result of the way the awards are put together. I think one of the real challenges I have is the putting together the Institute of Cocoa and Chocolate Tasting. So there's going to be a preference for a specific style of judging, which is a part of this, and how it influences the choices that are made. There may just be too much power in the hands of too few people at the moment who are defining what the best chocolate in the world is. There is somewhere between 3 and 5 people who have an outsized influence on that. We're only 97 to 23, only 25 years into this movement. I think it's way too soon, right, to sort of come to any consensus upon what the best chocolate is. Right, there needs to be more experimentation. All right, so my question is, I just lost earbuds. So did I come back? Let me go and check very, very quickly. For some reason, my earbuds disconnected real quickly, and it appears that I'm back. So anyway, so I think they're certainly extremely influential. There's some orthodoxy. I have some challenges associated with the concentration of power that's going on there. I think another really, really influential force in the craft chocolate world is Chocoa, in part because they've been focusing not just on consumer education through the Consumer Trade Fair, but they've also been focusing on professional education. And they're also one of the first of these kinds of fairs that have reached across the aisle, and they engage with both small chocolate makers and big industrial chocolate makers. And what I will, what I will say is we'll get to a particular image here. So this gentleman over here who's speaking up, talking, is Bas Smit. He is the VP of Global Marketing at Barry Callebaut, and he's speaking because I got him the speaking gig at Chocoa that year. So I think that one of the reasons why Chocoa is influential is because of the broad scope that they're doing. If there was only one, right, event that you could participate in Europe every year, and you're in the business of making chocolate and wanting to sell it, this would be the one event of the year. It is certainly much more influential for craft chocolate makers than, I believe, the Salon du Chocolat, Euro Chocolate, which is now in Umbria at the Umbria Fiere rather than in Perugia. This is the place you want to go and be. So there's the kind of people that they bring together, what it is they're talking about, how they go about present and think about things, brings them to that particular place in the world. And so that's it. We're at the end of the hour. My goal here was to say, here are what I think are some of the most important influences in chocolate, in the modern craft chocolate movement, going back to 1984. Right, with the introduction of single origin chocolate by Bonnat in the late 1990s with Scharfenberger. Stepping up, we go into the next decade with myself at chocofile.com, with Martin Christie at 70%.com, with John Nancy at Chocolate Alchemy, who I pointed out is, in my opinion, is probably the single most influential person in this entire movement in history. And if you agree or disagree with me like that, I would really be interested in knowing who you think might be a more influential individual person than John. And then we get into the more successful companies in the early days, the craft chocolate movement, the Mass Brothers, Dandelion Chocolate. A lot of people have formed their business around those two companies, right? And then the questions that Thomas asks, there are 3,000, 5,000 craft chocolate makers, depending upon how you count things. Last time I looked, Peru is reported to have 500 of them, and I don't think they're represented in any count of that 5,000. So I think we're currently upper underrepresented when we think about how many craft chocolate makers that there are and where the influences are. The reason why I'm doing this is that the words we choose to use inform our beliefs. Right? The language that we use inform our beliefs. Beliefs inform actions, and actions have consequences. If we buy into a traditional definition of what it means to be in the bar, right, and then we build a box around our thinking, let's go. Right? Let me go in and do this. If we then build a box around our thinking, right, how does that limit what it is that we're doing? If we as a community can't agree on basic definitions, right, so we're not in agreement, that means our customers are going to be confused as well. So there is value in taking a look at our influences, right? Understanding exactly what it is we're taking away from the companies who we say are our influences. So, in the world of my talking about chocolate tasting and how to taste chocolate, my primary influence is Joseph Albers, who's a painter, right? Which people, it's weird, Clay, how does that work? But I've thought long and hard about what it means for me to take inspiration from Joseph Albers. Now, we've got other people who have taken their influence about how they think about tasting chocolate from very, very different places. And their, Hazel Lee's Taste with Color is an example. The whole neurophysiology of taste, which is what is behind the International Institute of Cocoa and Chocolate Tasting. These are all very, very interesting ideas. But understanding what our influences are and why we choose them and how we incorporate them into our larger for want of a better term, worldview, and always questioning assumptions. So if we call ourselves a bean to bar chocolate maker, what does that mean for us? Are we only making bars? If we call ourselves a craft chocolate maker, does that mean we're only making 2-ingredient single origin chocolates in a melanger? Because that's what it means to be bean to bar, right? It's really important to have these moments of self-reflection and understanding, which is one of the reasons that I want to explore this. And this is also part of the larger exploration that I've been doing over the course of the last couple of weeks, when we've been talking about this notion of who decides what's fair, right? And then, is cocoa cause of climate change? Is it part of the solution to climate change? What do we do when we talk about improving quality? All of these things, Tony's Chocolate Only, is it a force for good in the world? It's about going and examining assumptions, right? And saying to ourselves, oh, is this new and interesting? How do I go about using it? Am I clear? Am I consistent in how I apply things? I think is really, really important. It's because I don't make chocolate on a day-to-day basis. I have the luxury of thinking about these things. And so I'm hoping that the time you spend with me each week, right, gives you an opportunity to go, I hadn't thought about this in quite that way before. And I want to go back and re-examine some of my assumptions. Why am I doing what it is that I'm doing? Why am I doing this the way I am doing it? Right? Are there better ways to go about doing it? How can I be better at communicating my values and things like that? And so that's what I'm hoping people get, for the most part, from the Chocolate Life Live. I want to thank the members of the Chocolate Life, because the members are, in fact, the sponsors of every single one of the Chocolate Life Live episodes. You can go click on a button. It says account because I'm logged in here. But if you're not logged in, it'll say join. You can join. There's always a free level, but if you have the resources and you can throw a couple of dollars, as little as $5 a month, or $42 a year, to support the work that we're doing here, please do. Also, you're on YouTube, go smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, share, whether on LinkedIn, YouTube, or Facebook. All of these things will grow what it is that we're doing. And now I want to point out 2 more things before we go. Number 1 is, if you are a member this coming Sunday, which is the 23rd of July, we're going to be doing the monthly members only AMA call. Now, you have to be a member and logged in order to be able to read the July newsletter, which is here. And if you read the July newsletter, the link to this Sunday's episode is in that post. So if you want to join, you can go do that. It starts at 11 a.m. Eastern time, which is 8 o'clock in Mountain Standard Time, which is where I am in Arizona. So I wanted to point everybody out to that. Right. So Kurt is saying, I call myself a hobbyist chocolate maker because that's what I do. That makes sense. And, Kurt, you're a hobbyist chocolate maker. You're doing it for personal gratification, personal exploration. I understand that completely. And perhaps most of what it is that I've been talking about today is aimed at somebody who is in the business of making chocolate, or wants to make chocolate a business, right? And these are very, very different things, but maybe some of the things I've been talking about would apply to what it is that you're doing, Kurt. It's like, when you think about one of the things that I talk about, let's put this back up here. One of the things I talk about to my consulting clients is, when you think about the chocolate that you're making, or you think about the chocolate that you want to make, what chocolate makers do you look up to? So, for me, 1994 Bona chocolate, it's like that, right, has really, in my mind, it has given me, very, very specific ideas about, what I'm looking for in chocolate and the chocolate I prefer. As a critic, I want everybody to know that, right? Here's where my biases are. So when I do rate something, you'll know, right? Or review something, you'll know where I'm coming from. You know where my biases are, right? But there may be something in what it is that I'm doing, Kurt, here, that you can go and say, well, I like chocolate from company A, and I like chocolate from company B, and I can like chocolate from company C. And then you can articulate what about that chocolate that you like. And then you could say, how can I go about recreating some of those ideas in my own chocolate? So I think that the notion of influences and orthodoxy, it also applies to hobbyist makers. as a way of self-improvement. You know, unfortunately, we don't have the same kind of community in craft chocolate that we do in craft beer. There aren't local craft chocolate guilds as there are craft brewing guilds. I mean, there's one here in Prescott. I mean, there's this fabulous microbrewery right around the corner from me, walking distance, downhill for the most part. And the things that they do to support the local community are just really amazing. And I would love to see the same things in craft chocolate, and I don't. And I don't exactly. I don't, I don't understand why that's not the case. Kurt, yeah, dandelion, 2-3 ingredients, and those that follow that pattern, I understand, and that's exactly what you did in terms of examining your influences, going, this is what it is that I want to do, and this is why I'm doing it. I mean, it's, as an artist, as a photographer by training, I went to Rhode Island School of Design. Everybody asks you when they look at one of your photographs, one of your, they're trying to pull out your influences. Where do, whose work are you looking at that influenced that? It's written, being able to articulate it is really important. Being conscious and aware is really important. So it's great, Kurt. Thanks for sharing that. At the end of the day, I also want to point out to people there's a new project that I'm working on. It's incomplete. I don't think it will ever be complete, but I'm working on a chocolate events and holidays calendar. So it's going to be organized by month, and it's going to have the event. If there are no dates for a particular event, I'm not going to try to keep this up to date every year. If there's no date for an event, then you click on the website, you can find the event. Let's scroll in. So in February, we have Chocoa in Amsterdam. Obviously, the 14th is Valentine's Day. We have the Oregon Chocolate Festival in 2024. It's the 1st through the 3rd of March. Easter in 2024 is in March. I will do it. Big Island Chocolate Festival in Hawaii in April. The Grenada Chocolate Festival, I don't have dates for this for 2024. June, July. Pretty big. The Salon del Cacao y Chocolate in Lima is just ended, I believe. Nothing much in August. Dallas Chocolate Festival is coming up. There's a big announcement this morning about tickets for the Dallas Chocolate Festival going on sale. October is always one of the biggest months when it comes to festivals and things like that in chocolate. We have the Northwest Chocolate Festival Unconference early in the month. Euro Chocolate at the Umbria Fiere in Umbria in Italy. Chocolate Portugal in Porto, the Salon de Chocolat in Paris. By the way, all of these three events share a week. No, Euro Chocolate and the Chocolate Portugal share a weekend, and the Salon de Chocolat is the next weekend. And an idea. The point here is an ask, right? Which is if you know of a festival or you know of a chocolate-related holiday that's not on this list and you think it should be on the list, what you can do is, if you're a member, you can go down and add it into the discussion, or there's also a link to email me if you'd prefer to do this anonymously. I will go do the research and I will put it on this list, and I'm looking forward to keeping it up to date and as current as I possibly can going forward. And with that, I want to thank everybody who's joined me today, watched from the beginning all the way through to the end, those of you who have, and to say that this coming Friday, tomorrow morning, Wednesday morning, is a town hall for the Fine Chocolate Industry Association. They're going to be following up on some topics that were discussed at the recent semi-annual meeting in New York earlier this month. And I have some questions that I want to ask there specifically about the glossary. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this coming Friday's episode of the Chocolate Life Live about the FCIA glossary. So we've been talking about language and how language that we use influences our beliefs and our actions. So we're going to continue on this notion of language this coming Friday, which is going to be 21st of July. At the Chocolate Life Live, talking about the FCIA glossary. And with that, I want to say thanks everybody for joining me here today, and to end up as I always do here on these episodes of the Chocolate Life Live by reminding you, if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, man, you're doing it wrong. Right? You got to rethink things, because if chocolate makes people happy. Chocolate is fun, right? And until then, ciao everyone. We'll see you on a future episode of the Chocolate Life Live.